Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
get the
my
email
email's
open
not
here.
working
I'm
right.
glad somebody else is in my boat.
But, okay, so I have a thumb drive right here.
Sail
It's
it.
also a keynote, but it should open in PowerPoint, I think.
Okay, so that's it right there.
This one?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, wait, I take it back. I have it as PowerPoint.
All right.
I always use Keynote, so I don't even have.
I don't think all our groups have
Thank you so
returned.
much.
Unless people decided to go outside and not come back in. It is such a beautiful day. I just went outside to make a call because and it is
the only
a
thing
beach day. So I encourage you guys after
And I can get that later.
Okay.
there is actually a beach at the end of the street. It's certainly not our best beach in town, but if you're hankering for some sand, it's nice to walk down to the bottom of the hill. Okay, so we're going to do the report outs from our breakout groups. I hope the discussion was enjoyable. So we're starting with group.
Nope.
Oops.
Just getting them all.
Are you getting them all? Okay, we'll just go in order A, B, C, D. And if the person that, well, someone from each group should report out. So it's up to you guys who you want to do that.
So A. Was breakout group 1A actually A? Or does it matter? Does anybody care? Oh, you're B.
Okay, somebody said
This is what I do. You in my next group? Just checking.
So missing one. Who am I missing? I have
you have
smock.
A.
What science to share?
That's
Oh, I know.
That's B.
That's B. I'm just gonna write D here.
D is in dog, sorry.
D.
Yeah.
Delta. Dynamite.
Okay, where's A?
So A. Was that Jamie's? That's B. Who is in group A? Are they here? Group A. You emailed them to me. Okay. Nope, that's not it. Okay.
Okay, group A. Let's hear from someone in group A.
Okay. Can you use the microphone, please?
You can stand there and do it though.
Okay, I will try. Oh, okay. You,
Clip it on and hold it.
wow, this suddenly got very fancy. Okay. If I start getting too professional, just let me know. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Okay. Okay. So, well, we made a long list, a couple slides. So we thought, first of all, so how do we know what we know? What technologies, tools, methodologies are scientists using to gain the knowledge that needs to be known and shared about the Arctic? So that sort of extends out to the who, where, what, and why of the research. People live in the Arctic. Might not, that's an important content point. Where is it? It's not an isolated system. There are local and global connections. Changes in the Arctic are very visible and easy to demonstrate. People have seen, it's really easy to share photos, graphics, video, etc. There's Western and Indigenous co-knowledge building happening, and that was mentioned in the previous presentation. The importance of the time and distance scales involved, which people often don't have a sense of. Some of you may know about the ISAT, was new to me, the NASA ISAT, and there's a link there to that. I need now to go like this, but I don't have anything to do it with.
Yeah, just hit the arrow.
Okay. Does somebody want to explain what ISAT is, who knows about it?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a satellite that just went up that replaced ISAT-1, which was defunct
This is
for
2.
about 12 years. And so it's great that it's finally up there and it's monitoring the major ice sheets.
Thank you. Ocean acidification. What can we or anyone do about the situation, about preserving the Arctic? Should we be translating IPCC content? And someone mentioned some examples of this. Does anyone want to say any more about that? Where this is happening?
Oh, I gave an example
Yeah.
where this conference this summer on the effects of climate change on the world oceans, they had a full-time cartoonist every day at every event, and they were all the chapter writers for the IPCC. And so his cartoons are all on for this conference that was a week long.
Right, so those are all online. You can actually see those? Okay, that would be good. I should have shared that link, but maybe I can do that via email. How the Arctic impacts food, how it impacts transportation, that there are many opportunities for innovation that aren't being leveraged in solving these problems and in communication. The interdisciplinarity, the multidisciplinarity of an approach. This is not a content topic specifically, but referring to how we can do this through STEAM, through storytelling, through other methodologies. Do people know about the SEARCH project? There was someone in our group who was, oh, do you want to say more about that?
Sure. The SEARCH project, I'm sure, is familiar to a lot of people here. It stands for the Study of Environmental Arctic Change. And one of the things that we've done through this program is to develop a set of 2-page policy briefs, or just briefs, that are called Arctic Answers. So the effects of Arctic change on ... And there's about 18 or 20 of them now, and they're aimed at sort of the high school teacher, congressional staffer level of knowledge and intelligence, and to help people understand how Arctic change is affecting a variety of different things that matter to pretty much everybody.
And those are downloadable PDFs too. We went through. Referencing the National Academies Press Arctic Matters material. That was a consensus report, and there's lots of things that you can download there for free also. And did you want to say anything about that? If people know that one? That study? Okay. And then vote. That's ours. Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so group B.
Oh dear. Wasn't prepared for microphone garb. I'll just.
It fits nicely on the lavalier. You did a good job.
Oh, I'll just stand over here. This isn't going to clip. That's fine. I'm not going to go digging around. Maybe. Yes. Whatever.
No? You can just leave it on the regular. Oh, there we go. Cool. So we started out, one of the first things we started talking about was actually about the importance of storytelling in a narrative, and then we realized that wasn't necessarily the content that we were looking for here. So I just wanted to make a note of the fact that for format is equally important to the content you're delivering. We talked about storytelling, having a narrative, and especially having it in the background of the beauty of the Arctic. And I didn't write STEAM on here, but that's what was in my head when I put that down. So that's a consideration. We went around the table and listed all the things, like each person picked kind of just one or two things that they thought was an important content area, and then we kind of put it together in these various subheadings and talked about where they fell under these kind of categories. So the basic background category, the geography, people not knowing where the Arctic actually is or that it's an ocean and what that means, and that's first and foremost one of the most important things is they have to know what it is. We talked about the rapidity of change in the Arctic, melting. I learned the difference between melting and thawing, carbon dioxide release, the ecosystem changes and how fast it can change and how fast that can then affect the animal migration patterns in changing food source changing as well. We talked about the section of how it affects me, that the Arctic is part of the global system, that it does in fact affect you even if you don't live there. And then we had listed a few other things like ocean circulation, the weather, the climate, both in the Arctic, and then how that affects it globally as well. Polar vortex and the lovely storms that we get named every year now. And then how do we know these things? So the large amounts of data that's accumulated from it, that's where we put the indigenous knowledge along with the knowledge that we're still working to accumulate through field work, tech and engineering, and all kind of the cool techniques that are used to gain information in the Arctic. And then you have to have a pretty picture of polar bear. Oh, I'm taking this.
How about group C?
I know it's tiny. I'm sorry. We were busy. I know. I didn't know that either. Well, if you do me well enough, the people that work with me know if I could, I'd have arrows pointing in every different way on here. So we started out, actually what was just presented, I think summarizes what's on my very wordy slide, and we're very similar in that sense, some of the topics we're talking about. And we actually started at the third bullet at the local community cultural perspective, and not only incorporating the indigenous knowledge, but actually creating partnerships and working with those people initially to find out what is the science priorities for those groups and what would they like to know. For example, food security is really important, but what is it about the food security? It's not just where are the animals migrating to. Are they disappearing completely? Are there more contaminants now because of the ecosystems changes that are happening? Or is the food just of poor quality? So that then ties back to the variability, and that it's not a simple story. And all of these are very complex topics, and that's something else to also try to communicate. So when you're talking about change, it's not just the big trends that you can present that are easy, but also the seasonal or regional variability. And then if you bump all the way up to the top and you're talking about how is a changing Arctic impacting me and making it personal, it's not only at a global level, but start again at that local community level and how those indigenous, those community groups, you're talking to the hunters, to the trappers, to the elders, how are those changes impacting them? And then how is the change happening in the lower 48, and how is there a change globally? But again, that community level is very important. And then we too talked about using the wildlife, the beauty of the Arctic as a stepping stone, somewhere to talk from, to teach from, talking about cascading linkages, but also can go back to the food security and variability. That the Arctic is an ocean covered by thin ice, that people don't often know this. They think it's a mountainous region covered by thick ice. Okay, it's not a continent. So that understanding goes back to what is the Arctic. I think that's what was just spoken about. And that I really like this statement, that understanding that it is an ocean on thin ice or with thin ice changes that perspective on vulnerability of that ecosystem as a whole. Not all ice is the same. There are many kinds of ice, and that is important for the local communities, that they actually want to know the changes in the ice, not just overall sea ice change. And then you can lead people with vocabulary. So learning those different terms is important, and figuring out what the different types of ice are, and that there's not just one type. And then again, data, that it's important that it needs to be tangible and accessible, but that it comes in all different forms. Again, it's complicated, and that people are going to be accessing those different forms of data in different ways, and how do we go about that? So that's where we were at in the small conference room.
Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. Was that good? Hopefully that was good. Okay.
Yeah, somehow when I said I'd do notes, I didn't actually know I was doing this too. So we kind of bin things a little bit differently, I think, than some of the other groups in terms of just kind of going to big bins of things that were scientific content priorities for these broader impact opportunities. We wanted to start with just this big topic of feedback loops. There are a variety of them that can be tackled, and the Arctic is just a great way to kind of look at these things. So these broad categories, including every type of, certainly sea ice is critical in there, but there are many others that go into fires, et cetera. And then just this whole idea of systems and systems-based approaches and systems thinking. And there was a strong sense that delivering systems education and teaching that concept is not something that is necessarily an innate part of education, and that working with learning scientists would be very useful in trying to help us figure out how to actually do that. And then we tucked under this the fact that the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by land versus Antarctica. Changing ice. Ice is not all the same. The last group had this exact same tagline, so I don't know, we must all think alike, but the fact that there are ice sheets and glaciers and sea ice and sea level rise, and all these different pieces are linked together and all undergoing change. Again, ticking into the global water cycle and looking at sea level rise, fires, climate, hydrologic systems. There are so many pieces that fall under that. The idea of amplification, Arctic amplification, and how these rapidly changing ecosystems are being affected and what are the impacts. So looking at impacts on the systems and impacts to us. People live in the Arctic, and it's really nice to see that this has been a common theme through every single room. How does this impact people not in the Arctic? So there was a sense that economics might be a way to reach people that are not physically connected to the Arctic, and so focusing on that and the personal. And then really looking at short-term local impacts, things that are within their understanding and within their lifetimes, or even shorter, within the next few years of their life, and then the long term, and then the idea that we really need solutions and action. So what are the things that can be done? Putting a face to science, which again, a lot of people have mentioned, but it's so critical. Making it personal. Scientists are people too, is our tagline. Permafrost as an important topic. And then this idea that there are major unknowns and thresholds that are still really to be discovered, to be understood. And one of our members suggested that the sensors that are needed and sensor technology is a great place for student engagement. We're still developing, we're still exploring, and this is a way to bring young people, younger scientists and engineers into this kind of unique field. And if I forgot something, I'm sorry, and you can jump in. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for those wonderful report outs. That was great. And what is coming to my mind is that it was really good to do this before we do dive deeply into the polar literacy principles, because I think these are some higher order thinking in terms of big pictures and big concepts and ideas and processes. It's a lot to digest, and my wheels are spinning, but I think this was a really great breakout discussion from the results that you all shared. So we're going to break for lunch, but before we do, I just want to say after lunch, we're going to do, as I mentioned, a deep dive into the new polar literacy principles. And at that time, thinking about these discussions, we're going to try to identify where we have resources already, and Lisa will explain that when we get going, but also where are the gaps? And I'm already seeing some gaps, so that may help us target where some needs are that we can address in future partnerships and proposal opportunities. So with hopefully everybody's wheels spinning, we'll break for lunch and reconvene after lunch. So just want to tell you a couple of things. There's plenty of seating right next door in the hazard rooms. There's a outside door where there's a